The professor pointed at the governor's son, who was now visibly trembling. "This man, Dad, he hit my car, threatened me, and tried to intimidate me with his bodyguards." The general looked at the young man with an icy stare that promised hell. The governor's son finally realized he hadn't messed with a simple professor, but with the army general's only daughter. Pure, overwhelming fear consumed him. The air, already heavy with asphalt dust and the metallic tang of tension, turned to pure ice under the general's gaze. It wasn't just a look, it was a silent promise of retribution, a gravitational force pulling the governor's son into an abyss of despair. The young man, so arrogant moments before, now seemed to shrink, his body trembling uncontrollably like a leaf in the wind. His daughter's words, spoken with a calm that brutally contrasted with the latent fury in her father, had been the sentence. "This man, Dad, he hit my car, threatened me, and tried to intimidate me with his bodyguards." Each syllable resonated in the ensuing silence, amplified by the hum of armored vehicle engines and the almost imperceptible movements of the soldiers holding their positions, weapons aimed. The general needed no further details. His daughter's voice was the unquestionable truth. His eyes, which had been fixed on the young man, swept over the armed bodyguards, who now seemed like wax statues, pale and motionless. They, who minutes earlier had displayed a menacing posture, were now disarmed of their bravado, their weapons looking like useless toys compared to the arsenal surrounding them. One of them, the burliest, swallowed hard, the sound audible in the oppressive silence. "Captain Almeida." The general's voice was low, but it cut through the air like a sharp blade, laden with an authority that made bones tremble. "Disarm these individuals, immediately." The captain, a young man with the seriousness of a veteran, moved with clockwork precision. "Yes, General." In a blink, a team of soldiers with synchronized and efficient movements advanced on the bodyguards. There was no resistance. The bodyguards, hands raised in surrender, allowed their weapons to be taken, their expressions a mix of shock and resignation. The metallic clatter of pistols hitting the ground was the only sound breaking the quiet, each impact an echo of their fall from power. The governor's son, seeing his protectors stripped of their strength, felt a knot in his throat. He tried to speak, perhaps to beg, but the words refused to come out. His mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water, while cold sweat trickled down his forehead. He looked at the professor, the woman he had so gravely underestimated. She watched him with a neutral expression, almost pitying, but without a drop of compassion. She didn't need to do anything. Her father was doing everything. The general turned his attention back to the young man. His eyes, previously icy, now burned with contained intensity. "You, sir," he began, his voice still low but with a cadence that promised pain. "You not only damaged my daughter's property, but you had the audacity to threaten her and intimidate her with armed thugs." He took a step forward, and the governor's son instinctively recoiled, hitting the door of his luxury car, now dented and unrecognizable under the military spotlights. "You seem to have forgotten who I am, or perhaps who she is." The professor, the general's daughter, took a small step aside, allowing the setting sun to illuminate her face. There was no anger in her eyes, only an unwavering resolve. She was the personification of calm amidst the chaos she herself had summoned. The governor's son, seeing her there, so serene and powerful, felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. The image of the woman he tried to humiliate superimposed itself on the image of the most powerful man in the army's daughter, and the dissonance was overwhelming. "General, please!" The young man finally managed to stammer, his voice hoarse and trembling. I didn't know. It was a mistake." The general raised his hand, a gesture that silenced the young man immediately. "A mistake," The word was uttered with cutting disdain. You hit her car. You refused to take responsibility. You called your bodyguards to intimidate her. And now, before my entire army, you call this a mistake. He shook his head slowly, a gesture of disappointment that was more terrifying than any shout. Your father, the governor, must have taught you much about power, but it seems he forgot to teach you about honor and respect. The mention of the governor hung in the air, a reminder of the political ramifications this incident would inevitably have. But for the general at that moment, nothing mattered more than his daughter's safety and dignity. He was, first and foremost, a father. And his paternal instinct, combined with his military authority, was an unstoppable force. Captain Almeida, the general called again, without taking his eyes off the governor's son. Arrest this individual. He will be taken for interrogation and will answer for all charges my daughter presents, and ensure that each of his bodyguards is investigated for illegal possession of weapons and intimidation. Captain Almeida nodded, his expression serious. Yes, General. Understood. Two soldiers approached the governor's son, their hands firm on the young man's arms. He did not resist. His body was limp, his courage completely drained. As he was led to one of the military vehicles, he cast a last desperate look at the professor, but she had already turned her back, walking towards her father, who embraced her with a tenderness that contrasted with the fury of minutes before. The pure, overwhelming fear that consumed him was just the beginning of his hell. The sun set, painting the sky red, like a premonition of what was to come for the governor's son. The general's embrace was a safe harbor in the eye of the storm. It wasn't the embrace of a commander, but of a father, firm and protective, who for a moment forgot the stars on his shoulders to focus on his daughter. Anna felt the warmth of that gesture, a relief that made her relax for the first time since the accident. The smell of gunpowder and hot asphalt mixed with the familiar scent of her father's uniform, a fragrance of unquestionable security and authority. Are you all right, my daughter? The general's voice was now soft, almost a whisper, but laden with deep concern. He gently pulled her away, holding her by the shoulders, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of harm. Anna nodded, a lump in her throat. I'm fine, Dad, just scared and tired. The adrenaline began to subside, leaving a trail of exhaustion. The general squeezed her shoulders. Don't worry anymore. No one threatens my daughter and gets away with it. No one. The last word was uttered with a conviction that left no room for doubt. He looked at Anna's dented car, then at the governor's son's luxury vehicle, now also damaged and under the guard of soldiers. The scene was a silent testament to audacity and subsequent downfall. Turning to Captain Almeida, who waited at a respectful distance, the general resumed his commanding posture. Captain, ensure that the individual is prosecuted according to the law. Every detail, every threat, every weapon. I want a full report on my desk before dawn, and make sure the press does not have access to this area until we have an official statement. Yes, General, the captain replied with his usual promptness, already giving orders by radio, the military machine operating with relentless precision. Meanwhile, the governor's son, whose name was Leo, was pushed into the back seat of a military jeep. The vehicle's interior was Spartan, cold, and lacked the luxury he was accustomed to. Dark windows prevented him from seeing the outside world, but he could feel the movement, the swaying, the muffled sound of engines, and the distant voices of soldiers. The fear, which had been an overwhelming wave, now transformed into a chilling panic, crawling up his spine. He tried to call his father, but his cell phone had been confiscated. The reality of his situation hit him with brutal force. He was alone, stripped of his power and privileges, at the mercy of military justice. Leo could imagine his father's fury. The governor was a man of power, accustomed to controlling narratives and bending wills. The humiliation of his son, detained by the army itself, would be a direct blow to his authority and reputation. What would he do? How would he react to this affront? Leo knew that for his father, this was not just a traffic incident, but a declaration of war. And the war was about to begin. In the governor's office, the phone rang. It was a restricted number, one of the few he answered personally at any hour. The voice on the other end was that of one of his most loyal advisors, laden with urgency and thinly disguised fear. "Governor, we have a problem. A serious problem." The governor, a middle-aged man with graying hair and astute eyes, frowned. "Speak. What happened?" His voice was calm, but with an authority that demanded quick, concise answers. "It's about Leo, sir. He was detained by the army." A heavy silence fell over the line. The governor felt a shiver run through his body. "Detained by the army? What are you talking about? This is a mistake." "No, sir. It seems he was involved in a traffic accident with the general's daughter." The advisor hesitated, as if fearing the reaction that would come. "She called her father, and the general mobilized part of his troops. Leo and his bodyguards were taken away." The governor's calm shattered. A growl escaped his throat. "The general's daughter! The general! He dared to arrest my son! This is an affront, a declaration of war!" He slammed the phone down, the device almost breaking in his hand. His eyes, previously astute, now burned with uncontrollable fury. The general had crossed a line. It wasn't just his son, it was his legacy, his image, his power that were being publicly challenged. "Prepare my car!" he roared to the empty room, already standing and donning his jacket with abrupt movements. "I want a team of lawyers ready to move, and contact the general. Tell him I'm on my way. He will regret messing with my family." Back at the scene of the incident, the general watched the sunset paint the sky blood red. Anna was by his side, her arm in his. Her serenity contrasted with the storm he knew was coming. He knew the governor would not remain silent. The battle was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, and the general, a born strategist, was already preparing for the next phase of the confrontation. The board was set, the pieces in motion, and the fate of two powerful men and their children hung in the balance. The night air began to cool, but the heat of the governor's fury was scalding. In his opulent office, overlooking the twinkling lights of the capital, he saw not the city's beauty, but the shadow of humiliation falling upon his family. The news of Leo's detention by the army, by order of the general, was more than an incident. It was an open declaration of war, a direct challenge to his authority and his name. He was not just a politician, he was a strategist, a man who had built an empire of influence and power. And now, his son, his heir, was in military custody for a mere traffic accident. Indignation bubbled in his chest. The general dared to do this. He growled, his voice low and dangerous, as he paced back and forth, his heavy steps muffled by the Persian rug. His pale and nervous advisors were already in motion. Renowned lawyers, experts in military and constitutional law, were activated. The public relations machine, always ready to shape narratives, received orders to monitor the media and prepare a counter-offensive. The governor would not allow his son's image to be tarnished, nor his own authority to be questioned. "I want Leo out of there in an hour," he ordered, stopping abruptly and facing his chief of staff. "And I want a meeting with the general. Now. No matter where he is, make him come to me, or I will go to him." His eyes gleamed with relentless determination. He was not a man of half measures. Meanwhile, back at the scene of the incident, the general, with Anna by his side, felt the change in atmosphere. The sun had completely set, and the lights of the military vehicles illuminated the scene with a cold intensity. He knew that the ensuing silence was merely the calm before the storm. The governor was a formidable adversary, a man who did not back down. "Dad, What's going to happen now? Anna asked, her voice a little firmer, but still with a trace of apprehension. She felt the weight of the situation, the gravity of what she had unleashed. The general squeezed her shoulder, a gesture of comfort and strength. Now, my daughter, the governor will try to use all his power to reverse the situation. He will try to discredit the army, me, and even you. He will claim abuse of power, kidnapping anything to protect his son. His eyes swept the perimeter, observing his men, but he will not succeed. He signaled to Captain Almeida, who approached promptly. Captain, reinforce security around the perimeter. No one enters, no one leaves without my express permission. And prepare a detailed report of every step we took here, with witnesses and photographic evidence. Every threat, every weapon, every word of the governor's son. I want everything documented. Yes, General, the captain replied, already relaying the orders. Military discipline was the antithesis of the chaos the governor's son had tried to impose. In one of the military jeeps, Leo was huddled, panic turning into despair. The luxury of his life had vanished, replaced by the hardness of the metal seat and the smell of military equipment. He tried to remember some lesson from his father on how to get out of complicated situations, but his mind was blank. The reality of being a prisoner, even if temporary, was unbearable. He was used to giving orders, not receiving them. The image of the professor, so calm and controlled while he lost control, haunted him. She was not just a teacher, she was the general's daughter. The irony was cruel. The governor, for his part, was already on his way. His convoy of armored cars cut through the night, sirens silent, but the urgency palpable. He had tried to call the general, but the call had been refused, an even greater affront. He is challenging me, the governor muttered to himself, his knuckles white from gripping the armrest. He will regret it. He knew that public opinion would be a crucial battlefield. The army enjoyed great respect, but the governor had the power of the media and a network of influences that could turn the tide. He imagined the newspaper headlines: General uses army for personal revenge, governor's son victim of military abuse of power. He was already formulating the narrative in his mind. Back at the scene of the incident, the general received news that the governor was on his way. A cold, calculating smile appeared on his lips. He's coming to us, he told Anna, his voice full of serene authority. Perfect. That way he won't be able to deny what he saw. Anna felt a chill. Her father's calm was more frightening than any anger. She knew that the approaching battle would not just be about a dented car or a threat, but about power, principles, and the fine line between civil and military authority. The stage was set, the main actors were in place, and the curtain was about to rise on the confrontation that would shake the foundations of power in the capital. The war was about to begin, and both generals, one military and one political, were ready to fight to the end. The governor's motorcade tore through the night's darkness, a procession of steel and power approaching the scene of the incident. The sirens, previously silent, now wailed softly, a subtle warning of approaching authority. Inside the armored car, the governor saw not the city lights, but the image of his son, Leo, detained by the army. Humiliation was a poison running through his veins, and he was determined to eradicate it. His eyes, once astute, now gleamed with a cold, calculating fury. He was a man accustomed to commanding, to bending wills, and the idea that the general dared to challenge him publicly was an unacceptable affront. Upon reaching the military perimeter, the cars were stopped. Armed soldiers, their faces impassive under the cold glare of spotlights, formed an impenetrable barrier. The governor's head of security exited first, attempting to argue, but was met with the same iron discipline. No one entered without the general's permission. The refusal to yield, even in the face of the governor's authority, was a clear sign of the general's determination. The governor, impatient, opened his car door and stepped out. his imposing figure casting a long shadow on the asphalt. His expensive suits and haughty demeanor contrasted with the surrounding military austerity. He walked towards the barrier, his steps firm and resolute. "I am the governor," his voice resonated, laden with unquestionable authority. "I want to speak with the general now." On the other side of the perimeter, the general observed the scene. Anna was by his side, her gaze fixed on her father, absorbing every nuance of the imminent confrontation. She felt the tension in the air, the collision of two worlds, two forms of power. The general, with his unshakable calm, made a gesture. Captain Almeida approached the governor, maintaining a respectful but firm distance. "Governor, the general is aware of your presence and awaits you." The governor growled, his patience exhausted. "Then take me to him, and tell him he's playing with fire." Captain Almeida, without changing his expression, cleared the way. The governor, flanked by his bodyguards, crossed the barrier, feeling the weight of the soldiers' gazes. Each of them was a reminder of the authority he had, for a moment, lost. He saw the general standing beside Anna under a spotlight, an imposing and serene figure, like a rock in the midst of a storm. "General," the governor began, his voice icy without any formality. "What is the meaning of this charade, arresting my son for a mere traffic accident? This is an unprecedented abuse of power." The general, without changing his expression, responded with the same coldness. "Governor, your son was not detained for a mere traffic accident. He and his armed bodyguards intimidated a citizen, threatened her physical integrity, and attempted to obstruct justice. Furthermore, his bodyguards carried weapons illegally and acted outside any civilian security protocol. This, under military law, constitutes a series of serious crimes." The mention of citizen and the general's glance at Anna made the governor turn his head. He finally noticed Anna, standing there as calm and composed as her father. Her image, which he had dismissed as a simple teacher, now took on a new and dangerous dimension. "Your daughter?" the governor spat, contempt evident in his voice. "So this is personal revenge? The army being used as a tool for family whims?" Anna took a step forward, her voice clear and firm, surprising the governor. "Governor, I am a citizen, and I was threatened by your son and his armed men. My father, as general, has a duty to protect citizens and enforce the law. It is not revenge, it is justice." The governor stared at her, shocked by her audacity. He was accustomed to women who cowered in his presence, not who challenged him. "Justice?" he scoffed. "Do you know who you're talking to? I am the governor, and your father, General, is risking his entire career, his reputation, and his army's budget over a flat tire." The general took a step forward, interposing himself slightly between the governor and Anna. "Governor, the law is above all, including your son, and my duty is to the law and to the safety of all citizens. The actions of your son and his bodyguards will be investigated. He is in military custody, and there he will remain until the investigation is concluded and charges are formalized." "Charges!" the governor roared, his voice rising. "You cannot do this. This is a kidnapping. I demand my son be released immediately." "He is not kidnapped. He is legally detained," the general retorted, his voice maintaining its calm, which further irritated the governor. "And I am not asking. I am informing. Leo will be transferred to a secure military facility and undergo formal interrogation. His lawyers will have access to him, but under military supervision." The mention of secure military facility and formal interrogation sent a shiver down the governor's spine. He knew what that meant. His son would be treated like a common criminal, stripped of all his privileges. The image of Leo, spoiled and arrogant in a military environment, was almost comical, if it weren't so serious. "You will regret this, General," the governor hissed, his eyes flashing. "I have the power to dismantle your army, to cut every penny from its budget. I will expose this justice of yours as the farce it is. Public opinion will not accept that the governor's son is treated like a terrorist by a vengeful general. Public opinion will also not accept that the governor's son threatens and intimidates citizens with armed bodyguards, Governor," the general replied, his voice unshakable. "And I have witnesses, photographic evidence, and detailed reports of every step we took here. Every threat, every weapon, every word of your son. The truth will prevail." The general's coldness was an insurmountable wall. The governor realized he would gain nothing with brute force or direct threats. He would need a different strategy, a battle behind the scenes, in the courts and in the media. "Very well, General," the governor said, his voice now dangerously calm, a sign that the real war was just beginning. "So be it. My lawyers will be in touch, and you, Anna, will regret crossing my path." Anna merely stared at him, unwavering. The governor turned abruptly and marched back to his car, his anger contained in every step. As his motorcade drove away, its taillights disappearing into the darkness, the general turned to Anna. "He won't stop," Anna said, her voice a whisper. "I know, my daughter," the general replied, squeezing her shoulder, "but neither will we. The battle for Leo is just the beginning. Now, he will try to attack us on all fronts. But he underestimated the strength of the army and the integrity of its men, and he underestimated you." Leo, still huddled in the military jeep, felt the vehicle move again. He didn't know what had happened in his father's confrontation with the general, but his father's absence by his side was a clear sign. He was alone, and the fear of an uncertain future, far from the luxury and protection of his family, consumed him. The war was declared, and Leo was the first casualty. The night advanced, and with it, the certainty that the foundations of power in the capital were about to be shaken by a confrontation that transcended a simple accident, transforming into a fight for principles, authority, and the fate of a nation. The military jeep cut through the night's darkness like a steel phantom, carrying Leo to an unknown destination. Each jolt on the dirt road was a cruel reminder of his new reality. The luxury of his sports car, the comfort of his mansion, the parties and privileges, all seemed to have evaporated in a blink. He was alone, huddled in the back seat, his hands cuffed in front, his eyes fixed on the passing landscape, without truly seeing it. The smell of metal, sweat, and gunpowder permeated the air, so different from the aroma of his imported perfumes. Fear, once a distant sensation, was now an overwhelming weight in his chest. He tried to convince himself it was a nightmare, that he would wake up at any moment in his soft bed, but the rigidity of the soldiers in front of him, the rifles pointed at the ground, and the cutting silence were too real. The journey seemed to last an eternity. Finally, the jeep slowed and stopped. Leo was pushed out, his eyes blinking under the bright glare of spotlights, illuminating a complex of austere, grey buildings, surrounded by high walls and barbed wire, a maximum security military facility. There were no red carpets, no servants, no deference he expected. Just the impersonal coldness of military discipline. He was led through Spartan corridors, the echo of his own footsteps accompanying him. An impassive-faced officer awaited him. "Full name?" he asked without even looking up from a clipboard. Leo stammered, his voice choked. "Leopoldo Montes, the governor's son." The officer merely made a note, without any sign of recognition or respect. "Personal belongings," he ordered, and Leo was forced to hand over his designer watch, his bulging wallet, his latest model cell phone. Each item taken from him was a piece of his identity, of his power, crumbling away. He was searched, stripped of his clothes, and dressed in a simple, rough uniform. The humiliation was palpable. Meanwhile, the governor's motorcade tore through the night's darkness back to the capital. Inside the armored car, the governor was ablaze. Fury bubbled in his veins, but it was a cold, calculating fury. He didn't shout, he didn't rant. Only his eyes, once astute, now gleamed with dangerous intensity. The general had crossed a line. He had humiliated his son, and by extension himself, publicly. This would not go unpunished. Call the chief of staff, my lawyers, and the press office. Everyone at my residence in an hour, he ordered his head of security, his voice low and controlled, but laden with a veiled threat. I want an official statement prepared. The general is using the army for personal revenge, an unprecedented abuse of power. My son is a victim of political persecution. I want the media notified immediately. Plant the seeds. The general will be unmasked. The governor's political machine began to move with frightening efficiency. Phones rang, emails were sent, strategies were drawn up. The war, which the general had declared, would now be fought on all fronts, legal, political, and above all, in the arena of public opinion. The governor knew that image was everything. He would paint the general as a tyrant, a military man who disrespected civil authority, a man who used the power of weapons to resolve personal disputes. Back at the scene of the incident, now calmer, the general and Anna watched the governor's motorcade disappear on the horizon. The ensuing silence was heavy, foreshadowing the approaching storm. "He won't rest," Anna said, her voice still a little shaky, but with a new resolve. "He'll use everything he has." The general nodded, his gaze fixed in the direction the governor's car had gone. "I know. My daughter. He is a formidable adversary, a master at manipulating public opinion. He will try to demoralize us, to isolate us. He will say I am an insubordinate general, that you are a provocateur." "And what will we do?" Anna asked, feeling the weight of responsibility. "We will do what is right," the general replied, his voice firm and unshakable. "We have the truth, Anna. We have the evidence, the soldiers' reports, the security camera footage, the testimonies of Anna and any civilian witnesses who may have seen the intimidation. And most importantly, we have the law on our side. He will try to distort the facts, but the truth has a way of revealing itself." He turned to her, a rare smile appearing on his lips. "He underestimated you, Anna, and he underestimated the integrity of the army. He thinks he can bend the law to his will, but military law is clear, and justice, my daughter, does not bow to privilege or political power." The general gestured to Captain Almeida, who approached. "Captain, ensure all evidence is catalogued and protected. Prepare a detailed report for the military prosecutor's office. And maintain Leo Montez's security under the strictest protocols. He is a detainee and will be treated as such, but his safety is our responsibility." "Yes, General," the captain replied with a military salute. The night advanced, and the capital slept, oblivious to the battle being fought behind the scenes. The governor at his residence was already meeting with his crisis team, planning every move, every headline, every attack. The general at his post prepared his defenses, his strategy based on truth and discipline. Anna, the professor who became the pivot of a clash of titans, was ready to fight alongside her father. The curtain had risen, and the first act of the war for power was just beginning. The nation soon would be forced to choose a side. The governor's official residence, usually a sanctuary of luxury and discretion, transformed into a crisis headquarters. Just an hour after his furious departure from the incident site, the meeting room was buzzing with the elite of his team. The chief of staff, a pale and efficient man, already had piles of documents and an open laptop. His lawyers, imposing figures in expensive suits and analytical gazes, awaited their chief's word. The press advisor, a woman with nerves of steel and a calculated smile, was already typing on her tablet, anticipating the headlines. The governor wasted no time with pleasantries. His voice, though low, cut through the air with the precision of a blade. The general crossed the line. He used the army for a personal vendetta, kidnapping my son and humiliating civil authority. This is unacceptable, inadmissible, and it will not go unpunished. He slammed his hand on the table, a contained gesture that reverberated like silent thunder. I want an official statement ready by dawn. My son, Leopoldo Montes, is a victim of political persecution, illegally detained by an insubordinate general who abuses his power. Emphasize the arbitrariness, the lack of due process. Paint the general as a tyrant who disrespects the Constitution and civil laws. Use the words kidnapping and abuse of power repeatedly. The press advisor nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Governor, we are already preparing the releases. I suggest we also focus on Leo's image, an innocent young man caught in the crossfire of a personal dispute. We can humanize him, show his vulnerable side, the shock of being torn from his normal life. Excellent, the governor approved, a dangerous glint in his eyes. And the lawyers, I want a habeas corpus order filed before sunrise. Allege illegal detention, abuse of authority, violation of fundamental rights, attack military jurisdiction, question the validity of any evidence the general might have. If necessary, we will go to the Supreme Federal Court. One of the lawyers, Dr. Mendez, adjusted his glasses. Governor, the situation is delicate. Military law has its own rules, and the general can argue that Leo committed military crimes by threatening an officer with armed bodyguards in a military perimeter, even if temporary. Furthermore, the general's daughter is the victim. This gives him a legal basis, however tenuous, for the detention. The governor stared at him, his patience wearing thin. Tenuous or not, Dr. Mendez, public opinion will not accept that the governor's son is treated like a terrorist. The narrative is ours. We will shift the focus from the accident and threats to the general's abuse of power. We will question his integrity, his sanity. He is using the army as his personal militia. That will be the headline, and I want information leaked about the army's expenses, about alleged irregularities, about anything that can tarnish the image of the general and the institution. The governor's propaganda and influence machine was in full swing. The night would be long for his team, but he knew that the first battle would be fought in public perception, and he was determined to win it. Meanwhile, kilometers away, at military headquarters, the general and Anna also prepared for the imminent storm. The silence in the general's office was different from the calculated chaos at the governor's residence. It was a silence of anticipation, of deliberate strategy. "He will attack on all fronts," Anna reiterated, her voice now firm, devoid of any tremor. "In the media, in the courts, in Congress. He will try to demoralize us, my father." The general nodded, his eyes fixed on a tactical map on the wall. "I know, my daughter. But we have the truth. And the truth, however much they try to distort it, is a powerful weapon." He turned to Captain Almeida, who stood waiting. "Captain, I want the military prosecutor's office notified immediately. Prepare a complete dossier, the soldiers' reports, the security camera footage from the accident site, the testimonies of Anna and any civilian witnesses who may have seen the intimidation, every detail, every threat uttered by Leo and his bodyguards. I want the chronology of events to be impeccable." "Yes, General," Captain Almeida replied, his voice grave and professional. "We are already working on it. All evidence is being catalogued and protected under military custody. And Dr. Santos, our military prosecutor general," the general continued, "I want him ready for any habeas corpus attempt. He must be prepared to argue the legality of Leo Montez's detention, based on the threats to an army officer and the use of illegal force by his bodyguards in an area under military jurisdiction. The law is clear. Anna watched her father, a mix of pride and concern in her gaze. He will try to paint us as the villains, Dad, as authoritarian military personnel who disrespect democracy. The general smiled, a rare and determined smile. Let him try. Our actions will speak for themselves. The army's integrity will not be stained by his lies. We acted within the law, Anna, and the population, deep down, knows the difference between justice and privilege. He approached Anna and placed a hand on her shoulder. You are living proof that justice has no price, no last name. You are the reason we are doing this. Far away in a Spartan cold cell, Leo Montez was huddled on a metal cot. The rough uniform scratched his skin. The silence of the cell was broken only by the distant sound of sentinels' footsteps and the echo of his own terrified thoughts. He had spent the night awake, the reality of his situation hitting him like a punch to the stomach. No one had come to save him. His father, the powerful governor, had left. He was alone. The food they brought him, a simple, tasteless dish, remained untouched. He missed his soft bed, his parents, his friends, his freedom. The fear of formal interrogation, of the secure military facility, of the uncertain future gnawed at his soul. He was the centerpiece of a war that had barely begun, and with each passing minute the realization dawned. He was no longer the governor's son. He was just a detainee. Dawn approached, and with it, the first wave of attacks and counterattacks. The capital was about to wake up to a war of narratives, laws, and power, where truth would be the first and most disputed casualty. The stage was set. The dawn that followed brought not the usual promise of a new day, but rather the outbreak of a war. The first rays of sun had barely pierced the capital's horizon when the governor's propaganda machine sprang into action with calculated precision and ferocity. Headlines from major news portals and the first radio and television bulletins exploded with the narrative carefully constructed by his team. Governor's son kidnapped by army. General abuses power and illegally detains political heir. Political persecution. Governor denounces military arbitrariness. The image of Leo Montez, with an expression of shock and vulnerability, dominated the screens, dramatically contrasting with the imposing and severe figure of the general, who was portrayed as an insubordinate despot. The governor's press advisor had worked tirelessly, and the result was an avalanche of misinformation that flooded the public space, sowing confusion and indignation. Public opinion, still sleepy, was caught by surprise, divided between incredulity and polarization. The governor's narrative, skillfully woven, was of a desperate father fighting against uncontrolled military power, defending democracy and his son's rights. At military headquarters, the general and Anna watched television in silence. The governor's words echoed in the room, distorting reality, turning the victim into the aggressor and the aggressor into the victim. Anna felt a pang of anger, a heat rising up her spine, but the general remained impassive, his expression a mask of strategy and anticipation. "As expected," he murmured, without taking his eyes off the screen. "He's a master at this. But the truth is more resilient than any lie, Anna, and the truth is on our side." Captain Almeida entered the room carrying a tablet, his face grave. "General, the first habeas corpus requests have been filed with the Military Court of Justice and, as predicted, with the Supreme Federal Court. Dr. Mendez is alleging illegal detention, abuse of authority, and violation of human rights. He's using the media to pressure the judges, General." The general nodded, his voice calm but laden with authority. "Dr. Santos is already on his way to the military court. He has all the evidence, the detailed reports from the soldiers who witnessed the threats, the security camera footage from the accident site showing Leo's armed bodyguards and the direct intimidation of an army officer. And most importantly, He has Anna's irrefutable and corroborated statement. Military law is clear on threats to officers and the use of illegal force in areas under military jurisdiction. Leo Montes is not just the governor's son. He is an individual who committed serious crimes, and his bodyguards acted as a private militia in a military perimeter. He turned to Anna, his gaze firm. "Prepare yourself, my daughter. You will be his main media target. They will try to discredit you, paint you as a hysterical woman, a vengeful professor, perhaps even question your sanity or your integrity. But your voice is the voice of truth. Do not bow. Do not be silent. Your experience is proof that no one is above the law." While the war of narratives exploded outside, Leo Montes, in his Spartan cold cell, was oblivious to the extent of the battle being fought in his name. He heard the footsteps of the sentries, the creak of the metal door when food was delivered, but news from the outside world reached him only as distant whispers, fragments of conversations between guards that he could barely decipher. He tried to ignore the throbbing headache and the emptiness in his stomach, but fear was a constant presence, a tight knot in his throat, a chill that came not from the air, but from the soul. The image of his father, the powerful governor, leaving the night before, had been etched in his mind. The promise of quick rescue seemed increasingly distant, a mirage in his desert of despair. He was no longer the spoiled, untouchable young man. He was just a number, a detainee, a pawn on his father's and the general's chessboard. The realization dawned, heavy and cold, with each passing minute. Freedom, once an inalienable right, now seemed an unattainable luxury, a distant memory. The capital was buzzing. In the streets, on social media, in congressional offices, the polarization was evident. Politicians allied with the governor denounced the military coup against democracy, calling for civil intervention, while more cautious voices and some opponents called for moderation and an impartial investigation. The image of the army, usually untouchable and respected, began to be tarnished by the governor's propaganda machine, questioning its impartiality and its role in society. The general knew that this was the most dangerous part of his adversary's strategy. It was not just a legal battle, but a war for the nation's trust, for the legitimacy of institutions. He needed not only to prove Leo's guilt, but also to defend the integrity of the institution he swore to protect. Truth, however powerful, needed to be presented in an unquestionable, transparent manner so that it could withstand the relentless attack of lies. Anna felt the weight of responsibility, but also a new strength, an unwavering determination. She was not just the general's daughter. She was the professor, the citizen, the woman who had been threatened and humiliated. Her story was the personification of the injustice the governor tried to sweep under the rug. She knew she would have to be strong, that every word she spoke would be dissected, every gesture interpreted, every emotion exposed to public scrutiny. But she had the truth and her father's unshakable conviction. He may have the media and the lawyers, she thought, but we have the law and justice. The confrontation was just beginning, and she was ready to face the storm, not as a victim, but as a silent warrior alongside her father, defending not only herself, but the principles that govern a nation. The nation awaited, holding its breath, the unfolding of the next act. The capital awoke under the weight of an invisible war, fought not with weapons, but with words and images. The general, however, was not a man to retreat from a battle of narratives. His response to the governor's avalanche of misinformation was surgical, precise, and above all, based on unquestionable facts. While news portals and social media buzzed with the distorted Montes version, military headquarters discreetly, but strategically, released excerpts from security camera footage. Not the full images, not yet, but fragments showing Leo's armed bodyguards, their aggressive attitude, the clear intimidation. Accompanying these videos were concise official notes detailing the military jurisdiction of the area and the illegality of civilians carrying weapons within such a perimeter. In addition to the threat to an armed forces officer, the general strategy was not to fight fire with the same intensity, but to plant seeds of doubt in the governor's narrative. He knew that truth, when well presented, has the power to infiltrate and corrode the most elaborate lies. Public opinion, initially shocked by the kidnapping version, began to see the first cracks in the story. Why were the bodyguards armed? Why the aggression if it was just a traffic accident? What is the governor's son hiding? Questions began to arise, fueled by the video fragments and military notes, which, though sober, were irrefutable. At the military court of justice, the atmosphere was tense. Dr. Santos, the military prosecutor general, was a man of few words, but with impeccable argumentation. Before the judges, he dismantled, point by point, the allegations of illegal detention and abuse of authority. "Your Honors," his voice resonated in the room, "the law is clear. The threat to an armed forces officer on duty in an area under military jurisdiction by illegally armed individuals constitutes a military crime. Leo Montes and his bodyguards acted as a private militia, disrespecting the authority and integrity of a representative of the Brazilian army. The evidence is irrefutable. The testimonies of the soldiers who witnessed the scene, the images showing the intimidation, and the declaration of Lieutenant Ana, who bravely resisted the aggression. He presented the detailed reports, the transcripts of the testimonies, the images which now were displayed in their entirety, showing Leo's arrogance and his bodyguards' threatening posture. The governor's defense, led by Dr. Mendez, tried to discredit the evidence, alleging manipulation and political persecution, but the coldness of the facts, the clarity of the images, and the solidity of Dr. Santos's argument were difficult to contest. The habeas corpus was denied in the military court, a significant setback for the governor's strategy, but the battle in the Supreme Federal Court was yet to come, and media pressure remained relentless. Ana observed everything from afar, following developments through internal bulletins and news. The initial anger had transformed into a resolute calm. She knew her moment to testify publicly was approaching, that she would be exposed, dissected, judged. But her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Your voice is the voice of truth. Do not bow. Do not be silent." She mentally reviewed every detail of the accident, every word uttered by Leo, every gesture of his bodyguards. Her memory was sharp, her conviction unshakable. She was not just the general's daughter, she was the professor, the citizen, the woman who refused to be silenced by power and privilege. Meanwhile, in the Spartan cell, Leo Montes felt the weight of defeat. The news of the denied habeas corpus reached him, whispered by a guard, confirming his worst fears. His father had failed. The promise of quick rescue had vanished into thin air. The silence of the cell, once merely uncomfortable, was now deafening, filled with the echo of his own insignificance. He was no longer the governor's son, the untouchable. He was just a detainee, a name in a process, a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand, but whose consequences he felt acutely. Fear turned into despair, and despair into a silent rage, directed at himself and at the world that suddenly seemed to have abandoned him. The capital, divided, watched the spectacle. The governor's propaganda machine, though shaken by the denial of habeas corpus and military evidence, did not cease. Now, the focus shifted to the arbitrariness of the military system and the fragility of democracy, but the seeds of doubt had been planted, and truth, like an underground river, began to undermine the foundations of lies. The general knew the battle was far from over, but the first round had been won. The army's integrity, for now, remained intact, and justice, albeit slowly, began to show its face. The next act would be in the Supreme Federal Court, where the clash of powers would reach its peak, and Anna, the professor who dared to challenge privilege, would be ready to defend the truth. The denial of habeas corpus in the military court was a blow, but not a knockout. For the governor, it was merely a warm-up for the real battle, the one to be fought on the highest stage of justice, the Supreme Federal Court. He knew that there the pressure would be immense, the visibility global, and the risk of defeat catastrophic for his image and legacy. The propaganda machine, previously focused on discrediting the army, now targeted the military judicial system itself, portraying it as an authoritarian relic, incompatible with democracy. The narrative was clear. Leo Montes was a scapegoat, a victim of a conspiracy to destabilize the civil government. The general, for his part, understood the magnitude of what was to come. The STF was not just a court. It was the guardian of the Constitution, the final arbiter between powers. The decision there would not only affect Leo, but would set a dangerous precedent regarding military authority and the sovereignty of the law. He intensified preparations, working alongside Dr. Santos and a team of military jurists. Every detail of the case was reviewed, every piece of evidence, every testimony, every comma of the legislation. The strategy was not just to defend the legality of Leo's arrest, but to reaffirm the integrity of the armed forces and the indispensability of their jurisdiction in cases that touch their structure and their officers. As the storm gathered, Anna felt the weight of expectation, but also a renewed clarity of purpose. She knew she would be the main target at the STF. The governor's lawyers, no doubt, would try to dismantle her credibility, question her memory, perhaps even her sanity, as her father had predicted. But she was ready. The preparation sessions with Dr. Santos were exhaustive but essential. They reviewed the accident, the bodyguard's approach, Leo's threats, the army's arrival. Every hypothetical question was answered with precision, every scenario rehearsed. She was not just a witness, she was the personification of the truth that the general and his team sought to defend. In her moments of solitude, she reviewed the images of that day, not to relive the trauma, but to strengthen her conviction. Anger had transformed into a silent strength, an invisible armor. In the Spartan cell, Leo Montes was in a state of growing despair. The silence, once merely uncomfortable, was now a torment. He no longer heard the guards' whispers about the outside world, only the echo of his own thoughts, a cacophony of fear and regret. The food, previously unpalatable, was now almost a luxury, a reminder of the life he had lost. The image of his father, the governor, who was once his shield, now seemed distant, an empty promise. He tried to cling to the hope of the STF, but with each passing day, the reality of his situation became more palpable, more suffocating. He was no longer the untouchable son. He was just a detainee, a number, an insignificant piece in a power game that crushed him. The capital was buzzing. The proximity of the STF trial further polarized the nation. Social media was a battlefield, with pro-governor and pro-army hashtags clashing. Pro-democracy demonstrations, called by governor's allies, began to emerge, denouncing what they called a white coup. In contrast, groups of veterans and defenders of law and order organized their own acts, calling for justice and respect for institutions. The international press, previously merely curious, now paid special attention to the case, seeing it as a barometer of the country's political stability. The governor in his office worked tirelessly. He knew time was running out. His lawyers prepared an aggressive defense, focused on delegitimizing military jurisdiction and Anna's very figure. They planned to argue that the accident was a common civil case, artificially inflated into a military crisis by an officer who abused her position and her influence. The strategy was to paint Anna as a vengeful figure, a woman who used her father's power to retaliate against a young man for a mere traffic incident. Truth, for them, was a tool to be shaped, not a fact to be respected. The general, anticipating every move, instructed his team to prepare a robust counter-argument. He knew that the battle at the STF would not only be legal, but also one of perception. Anna's truth needed to be unshakable, her posture impeccable. He met with her one last time on the eve of the trial. His gaze was that of a father, but his words of a commander. Anna, tomorrow, you will stand before the nation. They will try to break you, but remember who you are. You are the daughter of a general, yes, but above all, you are a woman of honor, a teacher who teaches truth, and an officer who swore to defend the law. Your voice is the voice of justice. Do not hesitate, do not bow, do not be silent. Anna nodded, determination etched on her face. She felt the weight of history on her shoulders, the responsibility to not only defend herself, but the principles that govern the nation. Night fell over the capital, bringing with it a palpable tension. The Supreme Federal Court, imposing and silent, awaited dawn, when it would become the stage for the most anticipated confrontation in the country's recent history. The fate of Leo Montes, the army's credibility, the governor's authority, and the very essence of justice would be put to the test, and Anna, the professor, was ready to face the storm. The morning arrived, laden with a weight that went beyond the capital's humid air. The Supreme Federal Court, usually a bastion of solemnity and silence, was bustling. Reporters from around the world jostled on the steps. Cameras flashed incessantly, microphones extended like hungry tentacles. The entire nation, and now the world, held its breath, awaiting the start of the trial that promised to redefine the limits of power and justice. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was even denser. The seats were packed. On one side, the governor's legal team, led by Dr. Mendez, displayed a calculated, almost defiant confidence. On the other, Dr. Santos, alongside the general, maintained a posture of serene determination. In the center, the STF ministers, in their dark robes, represented the last instance of the law, the arbiters of a confrontation that transcended the legal and delved into the political, social, and moral. The clock marked the moment. An almost religious silence fell over the room when the presiding justice declared the session open. Initial formalities were completed with the precision of an ancient ritual, but the tension was palpable, an electric hum in the air. The first to speak was Dr. Santos, the military prosecutor general. His voice, grave and firm, echoed. He reiterated the legality of Leo Montes's arrest, the threat to Lieutenant Anna, the violation of military jurisdiction, and the need to reaffirm the authority of the armed forces. He painted a clear picture of abuse of power, of privilege transformed into impunity, and of an officer's courage in defending the law. Next, Dr. Mendez, with his fluid and persuasive oratory, presented the defense. He argued that the incident was a mere traffic dispute, artificially inflated by an officer who unduly used her influence and her father's position to retaliate. He spoke of political persecution, militarization of civil justice, and an attack on democracy. The divided audience absorbed every word, every nuance, every rhetorical blow. But the most anticipated moment arrived when the presiding justice called her name, Lieutenant Anna Montes. A murmur ran through the room. All eyes turned to the side door. Anna entered, not with Leo's arrogance, nor with the rigid posture of a military officer on parade, but with quiet dignity. She wore her immaculate dress uniform, her hair in a perfect bun. Her expression was serious, but not tense, determined but not aggressive. She walked to the witness stand, took the oath with a clear, firm voice, and sat down, ready to face the storm. Dr. Santos began the interrogation, guiding her through the events of that fateful day. Anna narrated every detail with almost photographic precision. The impact, Leo's exit from the car, his arrogance, the threats from his armed bodyguards. The moment she called her father, her voice was calm, controlled, but laden with an unshakable conviction. She described the feeling of being intimidated, not as a fragile woman, but as an armed forces officer, on duty, having her authority and her life threatened. Images of the incident, already known, were projected, synchronized with her testimony, bringing her words to life. When Dr. Santos finished, the room was in stunned silence. The naked truth seemed to have filled every corner, but the battle was just beginning. It was Dr. Mendez's turn. He stood up, his expression sharp, and walked towards the stand. "Lieutenant Anna," he began, his voice soft but with a tone that promised venom, "you described a scenario of intimidation. But wouldn't it be more accurate to say that you, the general's daughter, used your position to turn a simple traffic accident into a large-scale military operation?" Anna did not falter. "No, sir. I acted as any armed forces officer would in the face of an illegal armed threat in an area under military jurisdiction. My position merely gave me the knowledge and means to activate the correct protocols." "Correct protocols?" Mendez scoffed. "Or a show of force? Were you not tempted to use your father's influence to teach a lesson to a young man who, yes, made a mistake in traffic, but who did not deserve to be treated like a terrorist?" "I was not teaching a lesson, Dr. Mendez. I was defending myself, the law, and the integrity of the armed forces I represent. Leo Montez and his bodyguards acted as a militia, threatening an officer on duty. This is not a simple traffic mistake." Anna's voice took on a steely inflection. The governor's lawyer did not give up. He tried to discredit her memory, question her sanity at the time of the incident, insinuate that she had exaggerated the facts under stress. He pressed her about her relationship with her father, trying to paint a picture of a spoiled daughter who resorted to paternal power to solve a personal problem. "Do you not think that perhaps the anger of the moment, the frustration with the accident, led you to a disproportionate reaction, to an escalation that could have been avoided if you had acted as an ordinary citizen and not as an officer with an army at your disposal?" Anna looked directly at the ministers, then at Dr. Mendez. "Dr. Mendez, I am an ordinary citizen, yes, but I am also an officer, and my oath obliges me to defend the law, not to bow before illegality, no matter who commits it. My reaction was proportionate to the threat, and the army was not at my disposal. It was fulfilling its duty to protect one of its members and public order." The room murmured. The general in the audience nodded almost imperceptibly. Leo Montez, present in the room, seemed to shrink in his seat, his former arrogance replaced by a pale despair. Anna's unwavering truth began to undermine the foundations of the defense, but Dr. Mendez still had cards up his sleeve, and the battle was far from decided. The trial at the Supreme Federal Court had only just begun, and with every word, every question, the nation's fate seemed to hang in the balance. Mendez's voice, previously soft, now carried a calculated edge of aggression. He would not be content with discrediting Anna's reaction. He aimed higher, seeking to undermine the very legitimacy of the military intervention. "Lieutenant Anna," he continued, his posture imposing before the stand, "you described a threat, but does a threat, however serious, justify the mobilization of a military contingent that surrounded a civilian area, paralyzed traffic, and pointed weapons at citizens? Do you not think that the army's response was, at the very least, disproportionate, an excessive show of force, perhaps even intimidation in itself?" Anna maintained her steady gaze, unwavering. "Dr. Mendez, the threat was not just against me. It was against the authority of the state, represented by an armed forces officer on duty, and against the law. When armed individuals acting outside the law intimidate and threaten, the response must be decisive to restore order and security. The army was not intimidating, it was protecting. It was ensuring that impunity did not prevail. Protecting? Mendez scoffed with a skeptical smile. Or imposing? Wouldn't it be more accurate to say that the general, your father, used this incident as a pretext to assert the power of the armed forces over civil authority at a time of latent political tensions? A louder murmur ran through the room. The accusation was direct and dangerous. The general in the audience pressed his lips together but maintained his composure. The STF ministers exchanged glances, the gravity of the insinuation hanging in the air. Ina took a deep breath, her voice a thread of steel. My father, General, acted within his prerogatives and duties. He responded to an emergency call from an officer under threat. Military jurisdiction was violated. The security of a public servant was compromised. The army's action was to defend law and order, not to challenge any civil authority. The only imposition we seek is that of justice. Mendez, however, did not back down. He approached the stand, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial tone. Lieutenant, you are the general's only daughter. It is public knowledge that your relationship is very close. Is it not plausible that your father, upon learning that his daughter was involved, acted not only as general, but as a protective father, and that this paternal protection escalated into a show of force that exceeded the bounds of legality and proportionality? Anna felt the sting of the personal insinuation, but did not let it shake her. My relationship with my father is one of respect and love, yes. But my father is, first and foremost, a man of honor and a military officer who has served this nation for decades. He does not mix the personal with the professional. When I called him, I did not call my father. I called the general, informing him of a situation of threat and violation of jurisdiction, and he responded as the general he is, fulfilling his duty. So you expect us to believe that the general had no consideration for the fact that it was his daughter, but only for the officer? Mendez pressed, raising his voice. That paternal emotion did not influence the magnitude of the military response. That a traffic accident, however unpleasant, required the mobilization of hundreds of armed men. Emotion has no place in military decision-making during a crisis, Dr. Mendez, Anna retorted, her voice now laden with authority. The threat was real. Leo Montez's bodyguards were armed and acting aggressively. The response was calibrated to neutralize that threat and ensure safety, not just mine, but of everyone involved and the area. If the army had not acted with the necessary firmness, the situation could have escalated uncontrollably with much more serious consequences. One of the ministers, Justice Costa, intervened, his voice grave. Dr. Mendez, please keep the focus on the facts of the incident and the legality of the action, and avoid speculation about personal or political motivations that are not directly proven. Mendez nodded, but his gaze still challenged Anna. Understood, Your Excellency, but it is impossible to ignore the context. Lieutenant Anna, are you aware of the political implications this incident generated? The polarization, the accusations of a white coup, the instability that followed. Do you not feel that your action, however justified you may consider it, contributed to a scenario of institutional crisis? My action was to defend the law, Dr. Mendez, Anna replied, her voice unshakable. If the defense of law and order creates a crisis for those who try to subvert it, the fault is not with those who defend justice. The crisis was generated by the arrogance and impunity of those who thought themselves above the law. I am an armed forces officer, and my duty is to defend the Constitution and institutions. If that means facing established power, so be it. The room fell into a tense silence. Anna's response was a direct blow, not only to Mendez, but to Leo Montez's own defense, and by extension, to the governor's image. Leo, pale, seemed to have shrunk even further in his seat, the reality of his choices crushing him. Mendez, visibly irritated by Anna's resilience, tried one last gambit, seeking a vulnerability. "Lieutenant Anna, you are a teacher. You teach values, ethics. Do you truly believe that the lesson this incident teaches the nation is that military power should be used to resolve traffic disputes or to intimidate civilians, even if they are governors' sons?" Anna stared at him, her eyes conveying deep conviction. "The lesson, Dr. Mendez, is that no one is above the law. That justice must be equal for all, regardless of last name or position. That intimidation and arrogance will not be tolerated, and that the armed forces are ready to defend order and the Constitution always. That is the lesson I, as a teacher and as an officer, want the nation to learn." Anna's response echoed in the room, laden with a truth that seemed undeniable. Dr. Mendez, with no more effective questions to destabilize her, retreated, his strategy of discrediting failing before the lieutenant's composure and firmness. The presiding justice, after a brief silence, declared a recess. The first phase of the interrogation had come to an end, but the battle for perception and truth was far from over. The nation, glued to its screens, awaited the next chapters of this drama that would redefine the country's future. The presiding justice's gavel resonated, a dry sound that cut through the charged atmosphere of the Supreme Federal Court chamber. "Recess," he declared, and the word seemed both a relief and a premonition. A hushed murmur erupted, like a wave breaking on a rocky shore. As those present began to stir, some rising, others exchanging significant glances, the nation, tuned into every word, felt the weight of the pause, the tension suspended in the air like a dense fog. Anna remained in her seat for an instant, her posture still erect, her gaze fixed. The adrenaline that had propelled her through hours of interrogation began to subside, leaving behind a deep weariness, but also a sense of duty fulfilled. She had faced the storm, the insinuations, the veiled accusations, and remained unshakable. Her truth, simple and direct, had been cast against the complex web of lies and manipulations. In the audience, the general, her father, did not move immediately. His eyes met Anna's for a brief second, and in that silent gaze there was a mixture of paternal pride and professional recognition. It was not a look of relief, for the battle was far from over, but of approval for the resilience and integrity demonstrated by his daughter. He knew that Anna's defense was, ultimately, the defense of the armed forces' honor. Across the room, Dr. Mendez, despite the setback in his discrediting strategy, did not appear defeated. His expression was one of contained frustration, but his eyes already gleamed with new determination. He leaned towards Leo Montez, who was even paler and more withdrawn, and began to whisper instructions, gesturing with his hand. Leo's arrogance had crumbled like a sandcastle, replaced by palpable fear. He was a pawn in a much larger game, and the reality of his insignificance before the force of law and truth began to crush him. The recess was a silent battlefield. In the corridors, lawyers and advisors hurried. Cell phones buzzed with the urgency of information and strategies. The media, hungry for every detail, surrounded the exits, microphones extended, cameras flashing. Headlines were already being rewritten, the narrative of the general's daughter taking on the contours of a heroine or a villain, depending on the editorial line and the political polarization that divided the country. For Anna, the recess was a moment of introspection. She withdrew to a private room where her legal team awaited her. They congratulated her on her performance, but the seriousness on their faces indicated that the worst was yet to come. "They will attack the general now, Lieutenant," one of the lawyers said, his voice low. They will try to prove that the action was a political maneuver. A military abuse of power orchestrated by your father. Anna nodded. She knew Mendes's insinuation about the show of force and the assertion of military power over civil authority was just the prelude. Meanwhile, behind the scenes of the defense, Dr. Mendes was in full effervescence. She is unshakable, he growled at his team, pounding the table. We couldn't break her composure or her narrative, but we have to turn the tide. We cannot let the general's image go unscathed. We will focus on the disproportionality of the military response. We will call witnesses who attest to the chaos generated, the paralysis of the city, the fear of the population. We will paint the army as an oppressive force and the general as the maestro of this orchestra of intimidation. Leo Montes, sitting in a corner, trembled. But what about me, Dr. Mendes? He asked, his voice weak. What happens to me? Mendes looked at him with disdain. You, Leo, are the victim of an abuse of power. Your role is to appear remorseful, but also terrified by the show of force you suffered. It's the only chance we have to shift the focus from your initial irresponsibility. The pause, which should have been a moment of rest, was in fact a cauldron of strategies and counter-strategies. With each passing minute, the sides reorganized, sharpening their weapons for the next round. The nation waited, divided between admiration for Anna's courage and fear of an escalation of military power, the fate of Leo Montes, the governor, and, ultimately, the relationship between the civil and military spheres was being forged in that court. When the presiding justice called the session back, the room was even more crowded, the anticipation palpable. Dr. Mendes, with a new folder in hand, walked to the stand with renewed confidence. His gaze at Anna was a silent challenge. The battle had merely shifted ground. The defense was ready to present its version of events, to deconstruct Anna's and the general's image, and to try to reverse the perception that no one was above the law. Truth in the Supreme Federal Court was a complex tapestry, and each thread was about to be pulled and tested under public scrutiny. The future of the country hung in the balance, and the next chapter promised to be even more explosive. Mendes's voice resonated now graver, more laden with calculated indignation. Your Excellencies, what we witnessed in the first phase of this interrogation was an attempt to justify the unjustifiable, an attempt to paint a traffic incident, however regrettable, as a national security crisis that required the mobilization of hundreds of armed men, tanks, and the encirclement of a civilian area. Lieutenant Anna told us she acted to defend the law, but at what cost and with what authority? He paused dramatically, sweeping the room with his gaze, before fixing it on the general, who watched from the audience, his posture rigid. The defense will now argue that the army's action was not a calibrated response to a real threat, but rather an excessive show of force, an intimidating maneuver that subverted civil order and generated unnecessary panic among the population. It was not the defense of the law, but the assertion of military power over civil authority, orchestrated by those who should be the first to defend harmony between the spheres of power. A murmur ran through the room, and the presiding justice had to bang his gavel to restore order. Anna felt a chill. It was exactly what her team had predicted. The attack was no longer personal, but institutional, directly targeting the general and the credibility of the armed forces. We now call our first witness, Mendes continued, Dr. Elias Viana, renowned expert in military law and public security. Dr. Viana, a middle-aged man with thin glasses and a serious expression, took his place. Mendes guided him with questions that outlined hypothetical threat scenarios and protocol responses. Dr. Viana, in your vast experience, would an incident involving a traffic accident and the presence of armed bodyguards, however aggressive, justify the mobilization of a military force of such magnitude with the use of armored vehicles and the encirclement of a civilian area? Dr. Viana hesitated, adjusting his glasses. Well, the presence of weapons and threats certainly elevates the gravity. Exactly, Anna continued, her voice gaining strength. And if these bodyguards, acting under the orders of Leo Montes, the governor's son, refuse to lower their weapons, refuse to allow civil authority to act, and create a hostage situation, keeping me and other civilians under veiled threat, would it still be a case for traffic police? Viana cleared his throat. In that scenario, the situation significantly worsens, requiring a more robust response. And what would you say about the perception of impunity, Dr. Viana? Anna continued, her focus now on the essence of the matter. When an individual with power and influence believes they are above the law and uses force to intimidate and subvert justice, what is the impact on public trust in institutions? Wouldn't that be the true subversion of the rule of law? Viana, visibly uncomfortable, admitted. Impunity, especially of influential figures, erodes the foundation of democracy and trust in institutions. Anna nodded, victorious on this point. So the mobilization of the army under my order was not an arbitrary action against civil order, but rather a necessary response to restore order, to ensure that the law was enforced, and to protect the lives of civilians threatened by individuals who refused to accept legal authority. It was an intervention to defend the rule of law, not to subvert it. She then turned to Donna Maria, the shopkeeper. Her voice softened, laden with genuine empathy. Donna Maria, I deeply regret the fear and losses you and other shopkeepers suffered. The disruption of your life and your business is something that saddens me, but I ask you, what caused this disruption? Was it the arrival of the army to ensure security and law, or was it the initial attitude of Leo Montes and his bodyguards, who created a dangerous situation and refused to cooperate, forcing a larger intervention? Donna Maria, with teary eyes, hesitated. I just know the army arrived, and everything stopped. But yes, it all started with that young man and the armed men. Exactly, Donna Maria, Anna concluded with a tone of respect. The army's action was a consequence, not the primary cause. The primary cause was arrogance, impunity, and the threat to the law. Our intervention aimed to end that threat, not to create it. The silence that followed was different from the previous one. It was not a silence of doubt, but of reflection. Anna had managed to recontextualize the facts, reminding everyone of the origin of the crisis. She did not deny the impact of the military action, but justified it as a painful yet necessary intervention to protect the pillars of justice. Your Excellencies, Anna continued, her voice now stronger, the general, my father, did not orchestrate a political maneuver. He acted as a father, yes, concerned about his daughter's safety, but above all, as a general who understands the weight of the responsibility to protect the nation and its laws. He gave me the autonomy to act within the law, and I acted. I acted to defend myself, to defend the law, and to send a clear message: no one, absolutely no one, is above the law in this country. Leo Montes, who had previously displayed calculated contrition, began to shrink again. Mendez's narrative was being undone, and responsibility for his actions once again hung over him like a dark cloud. The presiding justice observed the room, the media's gazes, the palpable tension. Truth, as Anna had demonstrated, was multifaceted. It was not just about the proportionality of the response, but about the proportionality of the initial threat and the importance of defending the principle of law. In Anna's final words, her voice choked with emotion but firm in conviction. I swore to defend the Constitution and the laws of my country, And that is exactly what I did. It was not an abuse of power, but the fulfillment of my duty. It was not an assertion of military power over civil power, but the assertion that the law is sovereign and that impunity will find no refuge, no matter how high the last name or how deep the pocket. The presiding justice's gavel echoed, ending the session. The final decision still hung in the air, but the battle of narratives had reached a turning point. The country, which had previously been divided between condemnation and admiration, now faced the complexity of justice and the need for a delicate balance between order and freedom. Leo Montez, the governor, the general, and Ana, all would be judged not only by this court, but by history. The general's daughter had defended more than herself. She had defended the very essence of what it means to live under the rule of law. And at that moment, the nation, though still divided, felt that truth, in its rawest form, had finally been exposed. The future of the country and the relationship between its institutions would be redefined from that day forward, a testament to the power of a single act of courage in the face of impunity.